Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the London Language Show. This afternoon, we have a webinar entitled English in Brussels, the EU, No Future. My name is Morag Neath, and I am Deputy Head of the English Interpreting Unit at the European Commission in Brussels. I'm joined here this afternoon by three interpreting colleagues. I have Miguel Gomes from the European Parliament, head of the English Interpreting Unit there. I have Lydia Philippek from the European Court of Justice, and I have Mr. John Swales, head of the English Interpreting Unit at the European Commission. Now, just to get an idea of the audience that's here with us today, maybe I could begin by asking for you to raise your hands using the raise your hand function. Could I ask how many people here in the room are native English speakers? Okay, I have 37, 38 out of 121 attendees. That's good to know. Could I now ask you to put your hands down and ask you whether you are currently practicing linguists, if you're an interpreter or translator or linguist in another field? Okay, we have about half the audience are practicing linguists. And do we have some budding interpreters out there? Well, we do. Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to launch a poll now, and it'd be interesting to launch this poll at this stage, and then I'll launch it again at the end, and we can compare the results. So I'm launching it. Are you worried about the future of English in the EU? Well, I'm glad to see that slightly more than half aren't worried about the future. I shall end that poll and share the results with you. So we've got 43% who are worried and 57% who aren't. Okay, I'll stop sharing that now. We can maybe come back to that at the end of this session. So without any further ado, I would like to hand the floor across to Miguel from the European Parliament. Miguel, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to see so many people from so many different parts of the UK and with several different nationalities, at least from the names that I'm seeing coming up on my screen. I'm head of interpreting at the European Parliament, and an interpreter, basically, a language professional. So we're here to discuss the current role of English in the EU, and perhaps to say a little bit about the future of English in the EU, in our opinion. Well, the EU, as you know, is one of the leading employers of language professionals in the world. So if you're a native English speaker, if you're considering a career as a linguist at the EU, this is the panel for you. We're here to try and explain to you as clearly as possible, and we'll be interested in your questions. Morag will be looking at your questions throughout. Why English still has a central role to play in the multilingual system of the EU, despite Brexit. I'll only say that word once. So first and foremost, English is still an official language of the EU. We tend to forget this. English, or we ask ourselves, is English still an official language? Yes, English is very much an official language of the EU. Therefore, that means it's part of our multilingual system, and English interpretation, English translation, English lawyer linguists have to provide their services at official meetings, translating documents. At the European Parliament alone, we have 80 different entities that meet regularly that require interpretation, for example. So I'm from the European Parliament, but John and Lydia are from the European Commission and from the European Court of Justice. So I'd ask them, what is the role of English in their institutions at present?
Well, I'd say that Miguel is absolutely right. English will remain an official language of the European Union, and Ireland is, of course, a member state and has no particular desire to leave, as far as I can see. In the Commission, also, English is one of the 3 working languages. There's English, French, and German. And in practice, almost all documents these days are drafted in English, whether they're drafted by Czechs or Latvians or Germans or whatever. English is the dominant language among the 3 working languages. But it's a bit different probably in the Court of Justice, and Lydia will probably have a few words to say about that.
Thank you, John. Well, it's not different in the Court of Justice in the sense that English remains an official language of the EU, and the Court of Justice also needs to provide access to justice in all 24 official languages of the EU, of which English remains one. There's no reason why Ireland should not bring cases to the Court of Justice. In fact, they do on a regular basis, and so far they have always been in English, even though Irish is now a fully fledged official language of the EU as well. English is also one of the official languages in Malta, and in the past we have had cases from Malta which have also been brought in English and not just in Maltese. So definitely English is an official language in the Court of Justice, and it is a fundamental right for all EU citizens to be able to bring a case in their own language.
So there's definitely a role for English as a result of it being an official language. But English, as we know, is a special language. Internally, in the European institutions, a lot of work is done in English. Behind the scenes, in meetings too, sometimes too often in English, and we'll say something about that later. But the members of the European Parliament, commissioners, the staff of the institutions, the teams of these politicians all work together. They're from different member states of the EU, and they work together most of the time in English. The vast majority of documents are written in English, which means that all the work that preceded those documents, that went into producing those documents through often many, many meetings, took place in English. And since the enlargement to the East, in fact, in 2004, since when we had 10 new member states, and later in 2007 with Romania and Bulgaria, 2 more member states, English became the almost unrivaled lingua franca in the institutions. Would you agree with that, John or Lydia? Do you think I'm right? Lydia.
Yes, I undoubtedly think you're right, Miguel, as far as the European Parliament and the Commission and the other institutions in Brussels go. The court is a little bit of an odd one out in this respect, because actually French still is, and always has been, the lingua franca in the Court of Justice. And for example, our judges deliberate once all the different stages of a case are concluded. The judges deliberate on the case, and they always do so in French, by themselves, without us interpreters. But, however, English is becoming increasingly in demand now. The younger, newer judges tend to have learned English at school, tend to be more familiar with English. So like it or not, English is certainly creeping in as kind of a second lingua franca, or at least a reserve lingua franca. So yeah, we are catching up. And also more and more cases which are not country specific. So trademark cases, for example, which could involve specific parties, individual parties from several countries. Very often English is chosen as the language to bring these cases in.
Yeah, I agree with both Miguel and Lydia. In fact, I remember when I was a young interpreter, that's quite a long time ago, French was the dominant language. And in fact, in the press room, all journalists had to speak French only until 1995, when Sweden, Finland, and Austria joined. Now, some people ask themselves, could French regain its ascendancy now that the UK has left the European Union? Well, no, because French isn't widely understood anymore. English is the only widely understood language, much to the chagrin of our French friends.
Yes, well, the other important aspect, we have a lot of language professionals from the poll we took at the beginning in the audience. The other important bit of information for you is that demand for English remains unchanged since Brexit. We have exactly the same level of demand. In fact, English is needed at nearly all the meetings that we hold at the European Parliament, for example, and nearly all of the missions in these COVID days. It's easy to forget that the institutions also travel and have an international presence. In fact, on those missions, English has a crucial role as the common language of all of the participants. Often in our system also, which is quite complex, we have 24 official languages, so English acts as a bridging language for our language regime. English is a problem solver for the organizers of meetings, and our clients systematically choose English for their meetings for this reason. Organizers often need English to work with each other too, because it is the language that they share. They're coming from all different countries in Europe, all of the different member states, as we call them, and they tend to work in English together. So the organizers also have an interest in having English. I'm sure my colleagues will have something to add about demand for English.
Yeah, I'd very much agree with Miguel. I mean, I describe English as a pivotal language. I mean, there's no Latvian interpreter who understands Czech or Slovak, so Latvian interpreters will interpret my relay from Czech or Slovak, for example. So it's a pivotal language, a relay language, because it's the only language which all interpreters understand. I'd also say it's a language of reference. Now, only the Estonians care about interpretation into Estonian, but everyone cares about what's interpreted into English, which is why, despite the excellence of our interpreters, I get more complaints than other people, because everyone thinks that English is his own business. The Secretariat, for example, will tend to listen to English. It's the language of reference, the language of record, a pivotal language in so many of our meetings.
Well, at the court, as I said before, French does remain the official lingua franca, so it's not the language of reference and the language of record, because the transcripts for the hearings and so on are all taken in French. However, interestingly, during the pandemic, when we have carried on working and we've had to keep going with hearings to ensure the principle of access to justice, English, the role of English has really increased because of the health conditions. The number of languages in any one hearing has had to be reduced because of interpreters not being able to share booths and so on. And now French and English are being put in every single hearing, because the judges have had to sacrifice, in many cases, their own language because we simply couldn't fit everyone in. So French and English have now become standard in every single hearing. So as I said before, English is definitely on the rise at the court as well.
Basically, to meet the demand for English, we have to count on language professionals from the UK. Overridingly, the staff interpreters, the freelance interpreters, the translators that we need, and the loyal English that we need are UK nationals. This has been this way for a long time. English is also an international language. It is the international language of choice of the world, we could say. It's the most widely spoken second language in the world. It's widely understood. So for the visibility of the European Union, and in order to be able to communicate with the whole world, English is an essential language. English interpretation, English translation are essential tools for the EU to stay visible, to stay relevant. Most meetings these days at the European Parliament, for example, are web streamed and they are public. And there are lobbyists throughout the world. There are around 30,000 lobbyists in Brussels, but throughout the world there are lobbyists now. They don't necessarily have to be located in Brussels anymore, who follow the work of the European Union, the public, the NGOs, citizens at large. And English is a crucial tool for this visibility, international visibility of the institutions. So would you agree that if language is power, then English is definitely a powerful tool for the EU?
I'd say yes and no, Miguel. I think that it's vital for the European Union to communicate with people in their own language. I mean, people criticize the European Union because it's remote and bureaucratic, etc. Well, it'd be even worse if it communicated only in English, which for most people is a foreign language, which not everyone understands very well. And that's why I'm not too worried about English taking over entirely, because we were discussing the fact that English has a bright future, but I don't think it'll take over entirely, because it's all very much a question of national identity. I mean, Latvians who recovered their independence only a few decades ago are very attached to their language. Perhaps the Danes less so, because they're so fluent in English, but it's a question of national identity. It's also a question of a level playing field. Recently, I was interpreting the trade talks with the United Kingdom, and Monsieur Barnier always speaks French, and he's quite right to do so, because he sounds more convincing in French. He's on safer ground. So it's about a level playing field in international discussions and negotiations. So I reckon that although English is a global language, although it's dominant in so many ways, I think that multilingualism is still indispensable. And as regards translation, it's legally indispensable, because you can't expect people to comply with EU law if they can't read it in their own language, quite simply.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with John in what he just said, and I said earlier that it's a fundamental right written into the Charter of Fundamental Rights that everybody should have access to justice and the right to a fair hearing. And in legal issues, when it's every single word is important, multilingualism is of course crucial. You have to be able to express yourself in the language that you understand and can use best in order to get all the nuances across. And that's why we're here as interpreters. And we have that pressure to communicate in our own languages to make sure that the exact message comes across too. English is one of these options for Ireland, for example. So I don't think there's any doubt that English remains important, but so does multilingualism. It simply would not be fair if English took over, because a lot of people would be at a real disadvantage.
Well, we're certainly not suggesting that English take over in our multilingual system, but that the visibility of the institutions would be compromised if we weren't able to communicate in English. And English has this role, really, whether it likes it or not, because it's in our web streaming, for example, at the European Parliament, 80% of our listeners will listen to English in our web streaming service. So there's definitely a preference for English amongst our client base. My last point would be, and before we take questions from the audience, is that English interpretation is largely supplied by UK nationals. This isn't likely to change. This has been this way for around 50 years, as far as I know. And we have had a cooperation with UK universities that have generated that have trained several generations of language professionals. And They make up the bulk of our staff in English translation units, interpretation units. My point is that the EU still needs these language professionals as much. We need UK trained language professionals as much today as we always have. That hasn't changed. Do you think there's any alternative to this, Lydia or John?
Well, I think that there's no alternative to finding English native speakers, wherever they come from. And also I'd add that there's a distinction to be made between working as a freelance and working as a staff interpreter. If you want to work as a freelance, it doesn't matter what nationality you have. If you want to join the staff, then you have to have an EU nationality. And so you have to make the most of your Irish granny or your Italian granddad or whatever, or acquire nationality somehow. Now, it's true that theoretically you can have derogations, you can have exceptions, but the general rule is that you have to have an EU nationality. I'd add a further point. I know that it may seem odd to talk about attracting people to the profession at a time when there's a pandemic, demand has slumped. So in the short term, prospects are bleak, but in the medium term, once we get over the current pandemic, I'm confident that demand will remain strong. And when I look at our age pyramid, I'm worried because we're getting rather long in the tooth, to put it very, very simply. I mean, in my unit, the median age is 50. And I think about 30% of our freelance work is done by freelancers in their 60s. So we need new blood, and we need native speakers of English. That is not going to change, and once we get over the current slump, I think there will be an acute need.
Yes, I agree that we definitely need native speakers of English, and the court is quite fussy about that, really. Our service, our interpreting service at the court, is much smaller than the other two institutions. We only have 70 people in total to cover all the languages, so virtually no comparison. And we therefore have to use quite a lot of freelance interpreters when there's a glut of hearings in any one week, for example, because the patterns vary a lot in the number of hearings per week. So we generally cover about 30% of our interpreting needs with freelance interpreters. And again, the need for English is on the rise since the English booth has now been put in to all hearings, and who knows whether this will carry on even after the pandemic, when all the languages are able to be used again. People might decide that it's a good idea. Now with the remote interpreting that we're doing, our planning office is also ensuring that we can recover, the staff members can recover better from any remote session, which means that we may do fewer sessions than we did before. That means that we have more need for freelance interpreters. So even now in the court, we need more freelance interpreters, especially in the English booth, and there's no reason why that shouldn't continue.
Okay, well, thanks very much for those introductory statements. I think it's now time to move on to the questions, because I see that I've got over 30 questions in the chat and in the Q&A. So let me try to have a quick look through. We've had quite a few questions about the ability of UK nationals to work for the EU, but I think you've already covered the point that as freelancers, there's no restriction whatsoever on the work front in terms of nationality. So I've got a question here. Is there an age limit to when someone can become an interpreter and be employed in the EU? That's from Nina Desai. Who would like to answer that? John, can I give you the floor?
No, there is no age limit. No. Staff interpreters can interpret until they're 65, and freelancers in the Commission are employed until they're even 67. Now, obviously, I think it's easier to learn something new when you're reasonably young, but there is no age limit.
Okay, thanks very much. I see that my colleague Miklos has put quite a few links into the chat, so you can refer to those if you have questions on where you can get information about different courses, and we'll also include a link to EPSO, which is where you can find information on competitions for the EU. Now, I've been asked which interpreting MAs in the UK will still be recognised by the EU after Brexit. Who would like to take the question of qualifications?
Yes, I'd be happy to comment on that. The MAs in interpretation are all recognised by the EU, and I think that will be set to continue. That there is no change in that. It's useful if you're a budding student and considering an MA to ask the university about their placement record in the EU. I think that's a fair question for a student to ask a prospective university. So that's all I have to say. Yeah. There are also, of course, universities on the continent that do MAs in interpreting, and in Ireland.
Yes, we had a specific question about that, where you can study as a native English speaker. There are a lot of universities that train native English speakers across the continent. And again, you can find details of the universities we cooperate with on the website. I'll put up a slide as well in a few minutes so you can note down the contact details. Okay, I have also had quite a few questions about what advice you can give to students regarding the languages to learn. I have, for instance, one of the participants who is studying German and Russian and would like advice on another language to learn if they're interested in an EU career.
I'm happy to. We're done.
Sorry, I know. We'll probably say the same thing. The requirement is for us is 2 EU languages, one of which has to be French or German. So, I mean, you can take your pick. Should we say it's probably good to start with bread and butter languages like French, German, Spanish, Italian, and to work on a third language in due course, which can be slightly more exotic. Now, of course, if you have a family background, say if you're half Czech or Slovak or something like that, that's fine, but you must have either French or German as one of your passive languages. I think that it's a tall order to expect someone to have more than 2 passive languages, but in due course, the aim should be to have 3. And if I could put in a special plea for German, we really would like to see more people with German. Spanish has become amazingly popular for, I think, lots of obvious reasons. It's probably a nicer holiday destination in the eyes of many people than, say, Germany. I don't know. And German has a reputation of being difficult. But we really would like to have more people with German.
Okay, thanks very much, John. I have an interesting question here. In the ongoing state of modern globalization, languages have become a barrier that cannot be ignored. At a point in recent history, some believed that Chinese might become the language of the future. What do you think about another language becoming a world language? What chances does the Chinese language have?
Okay, I can have a stab at that one. It's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking this question. Definitely in the past, there have been other lingua francas in the world. The most interesting comment I've heard about language domination by French linguists was that the relationship between languages is like the relationship between predators and prey. And it's very difficult to explain why some languages are predators and others are prey. In our multilingual system, all I can say is at the moment at the European Parliament, because of COVID, social distancing, etc., we've had to drastically reduce interpretation. And now we have MEPs, secretariats, member states, putting tremendous pressure on us to increase the provision of interpretation. So multilingualism is here to stay, and languages persist in their diversity. A lingua franca may have a destructive role in terms of absorbing some languages, but languages by and large still persist and are necessary, and are one's mother tongue is always much, much richer than one's second language.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel. I have another interesting question here from Christina McClelland. How can English speakers in Brussels or in Luxembourg protect their A language from Globish, EU English? Do you have any practical tips? Lydia?
Well, it's much easier now than it was when I started interpreting many moons ago, because now there's the internet, there's the radio. You can get the BBC, the World Service, Radio 4 very easily on the internet these days. You can get much more native English speaking television than you used to be able to. You can have a satellite dish, and that supplies you with a lot of interesting programs. So it's much easier now than it used to be. I know that I remember it used to be a real problem when I first moved. I started working in Brussels, although I'm in Luxembourg now. When I moved away, it used to be a real problem to be able to keep up your language, especially in the oral medium. You could get newspapers, of course, you could read books, but it's never the same as actually hearing it and practicing listening to it. But I would say, yeah, get an internet radio.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's become much, much easier. But what strikes me is how English in Brussels has been polluted by the previous domination of French. There are lots of Gallicisms which we use without thinking about them. Saying mandate for term of office, saying the regulation XYZ foresees that instead of provides or stipulates. So this is a kind of a revenge of the French for having lost their previous dominance. And there's a kind of Brussels jargon as well, which is a kind of lingua franca of the institutions, and which is fairly impenetrable to outsiders. I think that in the institutions, we need to make a special effort not to communicate with the outside world in this impenetrable jargon. It's all right for internal documents which are read only by the initiated, but we need to make an effort in our dealings with the outside world.
Thanks very much, John. I have a question here about the recruitment process. Somebody asked whether you have to work with a company as a freelancer to be recruited as a freelancer by the EU. I wonder if somebody could maybe say something about the accreditation process.
Well, I can chip in. For accreditation, I think it's important to be clear that we are 3 interpreters on this panel, so this will be about accreditation, and there will be, I'm sure, links to more information for those who are interested in translation. But for accreditation for interpretation, we have a process. We organize tests every 18 months. There is plenty of information, quite detailed information on the site Interpretation for Europe, and this will be going up at the end of the session. The exams are oral tests. You're tested in 2 languages, and the panels are made up of interpreters who are looking to see whether you have a good level of English, a good passive knowledge of your working languages, and good interpretation technique. So those are the 3 things that we look for. And good presentation, that's the last one.
Okay, thanks very much, Miguel. I think there's quite a few questions in here about the qualifications that are needed. Lydia, could I maybe give you the floor?
Actually, yeah, that segues in very well, Maura, because I was about to add that in order to apply for an accreditation test to get on the list of freelance interpreters working for the EU institutions, you do have to have a conference interpreting qualification first, which is a postgraduate qualification. Miguel was telling us earlier about the list of universities with which the EU institutions cooperate. There are a number of those that offer the European Masters in Conference Interpreting, both in the UK and in other countries. I think they all cater for English mother tongue, or many of them do. So it doesn't mean that you have to study in the UK if you're English mother tongue. In fact, if you want to improve one of your passive languages and bring it up to scratch, then a very good way of doing it is to try and get into an interpreting school in another country, where you can then practice total immersion in the language that you want to bring up to scratch and get your EMCI at the same time. But that is a requirement before you apply for the accreditation test.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. I have a question here about what is taken into consideration when interpreters lived in a different country for more than, I'm not sure exactly what that means, I suppose more than half of his or her life. Would that have an impact on the native level of the language, especially if conference interpreting is not taught in your native language where you live? So I think that ties in with some of the answers you've given, but I think maybe one of you could say a little bit more about the need to be a native English speaker to work in the English booth. John, would you like to add something?
Yes, I mean, we have had people who were not originally native English speakers, but whose English is of native quality. We've had Dutch people, Flemings, working in our English unit in the past because their English was of native standard or near native standard. I think it's very, very difficult to work to the same standard in a foreign language. And most of us in Brussels most of us in the English unit work only into English. A few of us work into a foreign language, mostly French, but it's fairly rare. However, for other languages, say Latvian and Estonian, it's very common to have what we call a ritur, so people working into English or German or whatever. But I think we need to remember that when you're working simultaneously, you're under enormous pressure, and your language skills have to cope with that enormous pressure. And in a foreign language, that's not so easy.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I've got a question here about whether you have any recommendations, tips for someone who's about to start a Master's in Conference Interpreting. Miguel?
I do indeed, I do indeed. The first is to brush up on the knowledge of your passive languages. The second is to develop a system to improve your English. So read good quality newspapers, good quality sources, and don't go overboard, because an interpreting course is a very tough course. It's very different to descriptive courses where you swat up on substances, on different subjects. You'll be learning 2 techniques, consecutive interpreting and simultaneous interpreting, and they are quite challenging and quite tiring. So don't be too hard on yourself. go for a jog at the end of the day or do something to relax. Get used to having a healthy lifestyle, and those would be my tips. It will be tough, but persist. A little bit like prayer, it requires persistence.
Thanks very much, Miguel. John or Lydia, would you like to add anything on this? Yes, Lydia.
Yes, of course, I agree with Miguel, and it is an extremely strenuous course, and it's very tiring, especially at the beginning. It's a bit like training up for a sport. It's very tiring at the beginning, and you can maybe only run around the block one time. But by the end, you can do a marathon, and it's amazing. What I would also suggest, you probably be learning with colleagues or co-students of other nationalities. Get together with them and speak in the other languages and give each other practice speeches, because that will increase your own fluency. It will lose you your inhibitions of virtually speaking in public in your mother tongue. It will basically make you more fluent, I think, in your mother tongue, as well as helping you with your passive languages, because then you have to listen back to what your colleagues say from what you have spoken about.
Could I add that it might be a good idea before you start the MA to spend enough time in one or two of your countries, the country of your languages, and while you're an undergraduate, to spend plenty of time trying to learn more about current affairs and history, all the background, which is so useful to understand what people are saying in meetings, to understand what speakers are driving at and alluding to. Because on the course itself, it's highly concentrated. You won't have much time to learn about current affairs and to improve your knowledge of the languages. So do these things beforehand, if possible. And I'd say, I hope we don't give the impression that these courses are really grim and they are strenuous, yes, but you're learning some very useful transposable skills. So even if you decide that interpreting is not for you, you'll have learned some very useful skills like analysis and communication, which will stand you in good stead in other walks of life.
Thanks very much, John. I can see we're almost out of time here. So out of curiosity, I'm going to run the poll again and see whether or not we still share the same view about whether you're worried about the future of English in the EU. Now, if you remember, in the first round, we were at 43% were worried and 57% weren't. And now we're getting there with the votes. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there and I will share the results. So, panelists, you have managed to win over some of our audience here this evening. We are now at 87% of the participants are no longer worried about the future or weren't worried about the future of English, and only 13% are. Okay, well, thanks very much. I'm going to give the panel members the chance to make one last statement and then we'll close it for this evening. Let me begin with you, Lydia.
Well, I'm glad that we've managed to convince you that English remains an official language of the EU. It also will remain, like it or not, a world language. The EU plays a major role in the world. It's a major means of communication. Communication is our business. So how can English not have a future in the EU under the circumstances? And thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you, Lydia. Miguel, over to you.
I'd simply say the European Union needs English native speakers to learn languages, to learn translation, to learn interpretation, and come and work for us. They're great professions.
Thank you very much, Miguel. I couldn't agree more. John, final say.
Yeah, I suppose we're beginning to look and sound like Lord Kitchener. Your country needs you. I'd simply say that English is alive and well in Brussels. So is multilingualism. Reports of premature death are unfounded. But there won't be a bright future unless we manage to attract enough bright, young English-speaking linguists. And not just interpreters, but translators, lawyer linguists, but also people who are capable of writing speeches in English, English-speaking spin doctors, etc. So there are plenty of possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We're out of time, so I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please do follow us on the various social media we've shared with you or check out our website. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.